All right, looks like we got critical mass here. So welcome everybody. We appreciate you being here. Today's webinar, I think we're going to tell an awesome story here. So the bottom line is a lot of us have a huge challenge when it comes to security and compliance. And the name of the challenge, the thing that we're all dealing with is there's so many compliance frameworks that we have to manage. There's SOC 2, there's ISO 27001, HIPAA, GDPR, the alphabet soup of all the different frameworks. And what happens for many of us is we just accumulate those frameworks, and over time, the audit burden and the compliance burden just really slows down our organization. It's an incredible cost on the organization in terms of financial cost, an incredible cost on the organization in terms of level of efficiency and effort for the team members to manage that. We're burning political capital with our engineering teams to get through these audits, all the things we're doing, and we become very cynical, and compliance becomes that check the box exercise that we all hate instead of true risk management, truly helping the business. And as I was thinking through webinar topics and people I wanted to talk about, there's a few folks who I think are doing this really, really well. And one of those people are Joey over at Platform. So Joey, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a quick intro for you, give people a little bit of background. So uh, Joey and I have known each other probably 5 or 6 years. He has and has been helping Platform build their global security and compliance program. So Joey, some of the things I told you that I'm just amazed at your ability to do was one, just being so attached to the business problems at Platform, like not only thinking about things from a compliance and security and privacy perspective, but thinking about what the business needs. The ability of Platform's a global company. They have people in so many different countries, the EU, US, others, and that translates into a global compliance program that can become very burdensome and difficult. And you've kind of built a global standard around that, kept the program efficient, built incredible customer trust. You have a great relationship with Risk 360 as your auditor. So you're doing that really well. And then also your team just runs well. I think you've branded yourself, Joey, as someone who's great at building processes, making them scalable, and then the ability to hand them off to other team members so they can run those things. And you've been really good at that. And then the bottom line is an incredible job of consolidating and harmonizing frameworks. I think we calculated what it would be if you were managing everything separately, and it was like 13 or 1400 controls if you're managing it all separately, and you're down to close to the 288 number, I think it is, around. So you're talking about a 75% reduction in number of controls, which translates into much more efficient audits, much less evidence that you have to manage, and so on and so forth. So Joey, thank you so much for being here and giving us some of your time. We're excited. So let me pause there. And where I would love to start is in your own words, can you just talk about Platform, like the challenge you guys were having when it comes to security and compliance, kind of your vision for the program in the early days?
Oh yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. I guess it helps to start with what is platform. So you might have guessed from the name, platform as a service. We have a number of offerings that center around that, but generally speaking, we provide value by helping web teams innovate faster and more efficiently, and we do that by making it easy to turn your code into applications without having to manage the infrastructure, without having to deal with the security components and everything. So if you're a traditional developer, you're going to be hacking away on your code using Git, and then at some juncture, some point, you're going to then push that to a CI/CD pipeline or integration server from your local development environment, and then eventually it's going to make it to a staging server, and that staging server may or may not be very similar to your development environment, and then you'll go through some fixes there, and eventually it gets to a production server, and you might have some more fixes there. And what's nice about Platform is we've standardized all that to the point where in some cases, you don't even need to have a local development environment. In fact, I don't even use a local development environment myself. I just push it to Platform. And when I push my code, some people are not going to like this, but it used to be when I pushed my code to a server, not platforms, I could get up, have a drink of coffee, come back, and sit down, and then figure out what went wrong, go fix it. Here, I don't even have time to get out of my chair. And the nice thing is with Platform, everything is situated, the environments and the different branches that you have. We treat it just like Git, so you can have as many of these environments as you want. And then it's as simple as just merging up and merging up. So we have a saying that says deploy on Friday because we take the risk out of that because you always have your development and your staging and your production environments are all the same. So.
Yeah, which Joey, for anyone listening, you're basically critical infrastructure, back-end infrastructure for so many other companies, plus you're globally, hence all the compliance requirements that you guys have
Yeah,
and how that manifests itself.
we are considered classified as a U.S. critical infrastructure provider, an Australian critical infrastructure provider, and with NIS2, which you just blogged about, also we are a critical infrastructure provider for them as well. And so that opens us up to not only it opens up to more regulation, I guess is the right word to use there, because when you think about the compliance landscape, right, as security practitioners, we think about your standards. SOC 2, PCI, ISO 27000, things you mentioned in the intro. But then we also have privacy elements of that. So if you're United States, you're going to be talking about CCPA, Canada PIPEDA, GDPR, UK DPA, Australia's APP, right? The list goes on. And then once you tip the scales over to become a critical infrastructure provider, then you have very specific controls mandated by countries that you have to meet. Now, thankfully, most of those are still relatively um, uh, easy to achieve. They're based on standards. A lot of them actually worldwide actually use the NIST standards. So as long as you have some level of NIST 853, NIST cybersecurity framework, some sort of that compliance framework, that's probably your minimum entry. Most of the more stringent requirements that we see tend to focus more on ISO 27001 style controls. But at the end of the day, they're all slightly different. And so you have to manage each one of those.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bottom line is when we talked years ago, Joey, and as we've talked throughout the years, you've been really clear about global standard, harmonization, and risk management, ability to communicate to your customer and regulators, but being very efficient. Because I think I might get this wrong. I think platform grew like 400% over the last few years as we were working together. So your company is trying to deploy their scarce resources extremely efficiently to serve customers. So you have to remain pretty lean on the compliance front. Like obviously you need sufficient headcount and resources to get the job done, but you don't want to waste energy on that stuff too by burdening the business with it. So kind of your challenges were there's a global footprint you have to manage. But the words that you've used me before is like you needed to get something that was scalable and repeatable. The repeatable success is something that
Yes.
you've mentioned many times. You've partnered with us to kind of harmonize and do gap assessments so you understand the delta between this new framework you needed and then kind of implementing it. So we kind of get the challenge. We know where you're wanting to get. Can you talk through like what is the roadmap? What is the playbook that you used to go to like continuously map, integrate? I think you call it like your cores framework. Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that?
Yeah, it's you won't find this in any book. It's just something that it just came out as I was trying to build everything and map everything together. Um, there's a key point in here. Maybe we'll touch upon this later too, but uh, when you're there may be a lot of folks in the audience that have come from large enterprises, but there's probably equally as many that come from startups, small, medium businesses, small enterprises. And the challenges you typically have when you're smaller, which was the case with Platform, we were a startup, now we're a scale up, is that you have to be very frugal about where you invest, right? And so, in order to invest, you have to have in order to, when you're thinking about this from as a CEO or as a business owner, as a board, well, you know this because you and Christian, the other Christian, run Risk 360. You have to figure out where to put that money, and the way that your business survives is through sales. And I'm not saying that from a capitalistic point of view, but a salesperson has to have a good product to sell. And at the same time, when they have that good product, they also have customer and some cases, like in our cases, regulatory requirements that they have to solve. And so as a security practitioner, as a privacy practitioner, compliance in general, I mean, one of your principal jobs has to be this what I call sales enablement, where we're helping people, helping our sales team, and ultimately our customers sell. And we do that through a couple different ways, but my primary way I like to do this is with trust, because it's not just it's very easy for us as practitioners to say, well, I'm just doing it a checkboxy. But really, especially in small businesses, they can live or die by sales. And it's not just you, it could be your fellow colleagues who may be impacted from jobs of how well the business does and how well it doesn't do. So as you grow the business and your business gets bigger and you have more money to play with, you get a little bit more flexibility. But when you're first starting out, there's this tight squeeze because you really need to invest in the product. So how do we do that? How do we balance it? And there's really two things to look at. The first is, what are you mandated by law that you must do? And the second is, what are customers asking for? And then if you're fortunate enough, you'll be able to, if a customer is saying, hey, listen, we want you to have PCI DSS level 1 compliance, it's possible you could partner with that company and say, listen, it's on our roadmap. We'd like to do that. We could accelerate that if you could help us out, and we can give you a little bit of discount. You can give us some money. And so that's what we did in Platform. We went and looked at some of our really
Yep.
larger customers that had these requirements, and we said, we'd love to get there. We have this plan, but if you want to help us accelerate that, that's great. Give us some money. We'll get some extra staff on board. We'll commit to doing it. And so that's sort of how we began to grow it. We did the initial investment around what's required, and then we started the investment on where we wanted to go, and then we brought in external sources of funding, sometimes through series. So if you go through Series B, Series C, we get a little funding that way. Um, but that's really good. And I happen to like that a lot. There are other security practitioners that don't like to think about it in terms of customers, but I do, because you're responding to a marketplace demand.
Yep.
You know that if one customer is asking for it, chances are many customers are sitting out there in the weeds, and your sales team doesn't know about it. Your business development reps don't know about it. But as soon as you start advertising that, hey, we now have SOC 2, PCI, et cetera, then they're like, oh, hey, this now suddenly opens up the possibility for us to engage you as a company.
Yep.
And one of the probably the best way that I figured out how to do that, getting that message out, is to build a trust center. So when I first started, there really wasn't a concept of what is a trust center. And so like if you go to platform.sh and just link to a trust center, and it has there you go. It has all of our cool information in it for privacy, for security, for reliability, all the legal items. And we publish publicly, so it's a public commitment that this is all the stuff that we're doing today. And by the way, it's one of my other favorite things. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take my marketing team's word for it. You can take our auditor's word for it, because we're audited by a third party. We get reports done, et cetera.
That's great. So just for folks up on the screen, there's two models I think are really helpful. Just a screenshot opportunity is we were thinking about like your journey, Joey. The way I said it was shared vision, harmonize the program, implement new elements, operationalize key work streams. And I want to share your course framework too, because I just think
Mhm.
those are helpful thinking models. But
Yeah, I could.
before we do, we touched on one thing that you mentioned, and you do such a good job. And I think one of the most difficult things as a security and compliance leader, privacy leader, is we really think about risk management a lot. We're very cognizant of like the security risks, the privacy risks, and we're fired up to solve those and protect the data. And sometimes what we're less uh, mature in doing is really staying attached to business objectives, thinking about how does this matter in the context of what the business needs. And you talked about that just now, and you've always done a really good job. Like, for example, what do the customers need? And then working with customers to sometimes help fund your own security and compliance obligation because it's a partnership. There's joint interest in doing that. So you've always showed really good business acumen in that way. Can you talk a little bit about like just behind the scenes? Like, how are you getting access to executives? How are you filtering what they want and translating that into requirements? Like, what is the meeting cadence? What is your secret sauce to get that kind of access? Because I know a lot of security leaders have issues with that.
It'd be good also for us to talk to this slide and the core slide in the future. But for me, it's been sort of a mix. It started out as a information security steering committee, which was a select group of people that ultimately became our C-suite. And then I realized that in order for me to generate greater buy-in and crucially affect a culture change, so this is probably something that maybe not everybody thinks about. They might say, I have a difficult time at work, I can't get the right attention, but a lot of it has to do with changing the culture of the business. I realized that I needed a larger audience. I needed to get more buy-in, mostly so that I could get more input back, more eyes on things, but also to be able to explain and to build this shared vision and ultimately a shared culture as to where are we and what we used to do. So, as an example, platform is a platform as a service, and we could say platform is platform as a service, and we happen to care about security compliance. And I flipped that on its head. And for years, for our new hires, we used to say, and we had C-suite people would say on the new hire calls that we're a privacy and security company that happens to run a PaaS. And so we flipped it around. And in doing that, we were able to change, because it's not just me. I might have been a driving force behind it or a pain in people's neck about it, but I really wanted to have our vision, our values changed. It got to that point where I said, we are good custodians of our customers' data. And when we think about it in those terms, the whole company rallies around that objective. And so every time that we go to deploy something new, build something new, even go to a new customer, we're evaluating how are we going to be good custodians? Are we the best fit? What can we do to help our customers? And by it's amazing that if you treat a customer with respect and you help satisfy their needs, how grateful they are. Wow, finally somebody listens to me. And so you end up developing this really nice, sometimes very long, ideally very long partnership with that person. It allows you again to go leverage, and that's one of the ways that we were able to get like some additional funding. And one of our partners that our customers that we partner with said, "Hey, let's tackle this and let's get HIPAA." So sure enough, we went and got HIPAA as an
Yeah,
example.
that's
Um,
awesome.
and then I do
Joey,
reports, regular reports too. So the other answer is,
yeah,
I produce or had previously done, and now I've handed that off to different groups. We have a data privacy report and a security report. They go to the entire company, and there's a commitment from our CEO to bring them up to the board to share them. So in the past, I would go to the board to do this, but now because nobody's panicking about privacy and security because we have all these certifications, it's a lot easier and a much more streamlined to have our CEO be able to convey that information up. So far, that's working really well.
yeah. I know as y'all enter new markets and new types of customers, enterprise customers, like it from my outsider's perspective, it's, I guess semi-insider because we audit you guys. It seems like this has become a little bit of a competitive advantage for you guys globally. So awesome. The other thing I want to talk about, Joey, is I think the cores. I want to talk about that because I love that concept you came up with. So one of the hardest things that teams have to deal with is they build this program but it's not static. There's you either do M&A, so you acquire a new product, you have to get them up to speed, or a new framework comes out of left field and you have to integrate that, or you're entering a new industry vertical like healthcare and suddenly you have to do HIPAA. So you have to have this kind of methodology, this process to bring on new frameworks. And I think the words that you use was your cores approach, which I'm going to flash on the screen. Can you kind of talk through that and like how it's implemented in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And it relates. If you screenshot at the other slide, this is sort of feeder material into it. So there's so consolidate. Oh, wow, we have typos in there. Oh, that's awesome. So consolidate. So when you look at all the requirements that you have to do across all different standards, what the best way that I found to do this is to take all of those requirements and figure out how to consolidate them into one. So for example, if you have a requirement for passwords, and the password have to be 8 characters, and suddenly you get PCI, it says you have to do 90 days. You consolidate all those so that you have internally just one item. So you consolidate all these various things and you make one strongest level item. Now, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. So you consolidate everything together. So that way you only have to worry about one thing and not all of these other components. And sometimes you can't consolidate. Sometimes you have to stack. There'll be one and there'll be something else that's slightly different. But the idea there is to just boil everything down, distill it down so that you have less to work with, but you still are maintaining an equally high, if not higher, because it'll ultimately end up being higher security posture. Right?
Yeah, the example I think is easy for everyone to understand is policies. You could SOC 2 requires policies, ISO requires policies, GDPR arguably requires policies. Well, instead of having three different policy controls, you consolidate it into one, but your methodology has been to adopt the most rigorous global standard for that because the theory is that everything else will fall out of that.
Absolutely. And that's actually the key. I'll get to that in the standardized one. But yeah, so you adopt the hardest one and we put in all the extra stuff to it. So what that looks like over time as you're doing this is you start off with something small and it continues to grow. But the requirements are, it's just an add-on. So it's not like the sea change. Usually the first time you put one in, it's a big change and everybody sort of panics and we don't know how we're going to do it. And then once they understand it, then we're just doing little amendments to it, little revisions to
Yep.
it to get higher. The next one is operationalize. And this is probably the place that I've gotten the biggest win out of this. So operationalize means as you mentioned earlier, repeatable success, right? So I was thinking to myself, how do I get repeatable success through an audit? How do I guarantee that at the end of the audit, or at the end of the year when I have an audit, how am I going to pass and feel comfortable about that? And the way that I've realized the best way for me to do it was to schedule all the work ahead. So internally, we use Jira and a couple other tools. However, you do it at your own company. But what I do is I plan it out. And so I plan, here's the security stuff, here's the privacy stuff, here's the stuff we have to do for ops. And so we have this all on a roadmap for a year and it automatically fires. Okay, this month we have to do this month we have to do that. And I do it in such a way that we have a lot of lead time. So I basically front load everything as reasonably as possible. Now, there are team schedules involved where sometimes, I would really like to have something done in the first quarter, but it's not done until the third quarter. There's business objectives that come in there that business priorities that will take precedence over that. But the idea is to build your map for your entire year so you don't have to think about it. It will do the thinking for you, and then you still have enough leeway out there. And then the other component that I do, and it's something that came from my project management days, if I'm doing something and it's a quarterly requirement, I don't want to wait to a quarter to find out that I've got a problem. So if I'm on a quarterly cadence, I change that internally and I do it on a monthly cadence. And anytime I can do that, it doesn't involve extra money. So you're not going to do that typically with external pen testing, external vulnerability scans. Maybe you can, depending on what the pricing model with your vendor is. But those things that involve real money, I do when they're required. But if I have the capacity inside the team to do internal audits, to do internal scannings, right, I'm going to bring that frequency up to something that is either that is short. So I know that if I have a problem, I could address it well inside the window and still be able to come back to my auditors and say, look, well, we did have a failure here, but here's, 3 more months of positives where we did it. And,
Yep.
where we only need to show one. Reuse is the next one, and this is pretty straightforward. So we do more audits outside of Risk 360, which it would be great if we could standardize on a single auditor, but sometimes there are certain places. So for example, we recently completed a EcoVadis audit. We got a top 5% for sustainability, a gold medal, in fact. And what we did with that and some news that's coming next week, which is going to be fabulous, we were able to take the work that we've already done for other audits, SOC 2, PCI, et cetera, and be able to just take the exact same evidence, sometimes even just the certificates. I could reuse PCI and submit that, reuse SOC 2, and use that as evidence toward this other audit that's outside of your current auditors. And so what that allows me to do is it allows me to argue, hey, we've already had a third-party audit. We've already gone through all these controls you're asking us for. Here is a certification from our auditor. Can we use this to reduce the audit burden for this new thing?
Yep.
And oftentimes they'll take it. Some cases they won't, which case we can reuse the actual evidence that we've uploaded.
Yep.
And while you have this on the screen, one of the things that's interesting is something I've always wanted. Back to the consolidation component and the reuse is also the reuse for existing audits. So if I have a control right here that's flagged as it's a PCI DSS control, and I'm going to also do it for SOC 2. Remember in the beginning I said I want to consolidate all these things together in tools like Risk 360's Full Circle and other vendor things. All I do is my brain just stopped. All I do is tag all them together so I can use the exact same evidence and it solves everything. So when we first started exploring this with Risk 360's older tool, that Full Circle was born out of, we were using a tagging method, and that alone took 30% of the audit burden off just by using tags.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge winner. And when I can do that, it means I don't have to, it's easier for my staff, which means I don't have to keep going to my CFO, to my CEO and saying I need more staff because,
Yeah.
now
Yeah, Joe,
become
I have this
efficient.
pulled up. This is for y'all looking for folks who are trying to harmonize control frameworks. This is our platform, Full Circle, where we try to solve this exact problem. So, you can in this example, this is not platform's example, but this is a demo environment. You have ISO, PCI SOC 2. You can spin up additional frameworks, and what we've trying to do is harmonize those frameworks. So if you have a single control, it maps across three different controls. Then you can also, more importantly, from an audit perspective, map the evidence that you would actually have to provide. You can set reoccurring events. So if it's a quarterly control, you can manage operationalize it. You can do reports. One of the things I love, just to show this off a little bit, is when we're actually ISO certified too at Risk 360. So we might be in the process of gathering evidence, and I can just go to this dashboard. I'm like, who the heck owes me evidence? All right, we have AC Slater here. Go in there and see what has expired that they owe me. So, Joey, you guys use a version of Full Circle during the assessments. You guys also use Jira really well to operationalize your program. Here at Risk 360 and some of our clients, we use Full Circle to harmonize. The bottom line is there's multiple ways to solve that problem, but the same philosophy is still true in that you have to harmonize, map, reuse, all the things that you were mentioning. Just wanted to show a couple real world examples there.
Yeah, that's nice because it reduces the audit burden for us, and at times it can also reduce, as we've discovered, it reduces the audit burden for our auditors when we're able to do that because then they don't have to look at a specific piece of evidence for everything. They can still reuse the same piece of evidence.
That's
So if
right.
you So we bring up the cores model again. So that's sort of the reuse. So we're going to take this evidence to it. So extend, there's really a separate piece that's missing on here for the extend. So the first part here is true, which is I want to encourage everyone to embrace your opportunities for improvement. If an auditor gives you an opportunity for improvement, a lot of people will go, do I have to do it? No, I don't have to do it. Okay, I'm going to ignore it. I don't have time for it. But usually auditors give you that for a good reason, because they know that there's a change coming down, or they see that there's a critical mass effort going that way, or it's going to make their life easier, or your audits easier. It could help prevent failures. So, I've just taken it as a policy that we'll take all of the opportunities for improvement. We're going to look at all of those OFIs. We're going to evaluate them, and usually I would say 98% of the time, we're going to implement whatever that OFI is. And then that's part one. Part two is we're always going to look for improvement and automation. So on the previous slide, I have this, when I think about GRC, um, we basically have three different missions, right? And that is the maintain, the improve, and the gain new. So the maintain is on, I think it's on slide 7 there. Yep, under number 3. So maintain is what you're trying to maintain what you've got. We've got the beachhead, we're security here, and we're going to put our resources to maintaining that. Make sure that we're going to pass our audits. We're not going to jeopardize ourselves, our customers, et cetera. The improved portion is just that. We're going to look for ways to automate, to improve documentation, to improve processes, and then gain new is just I'm going to get something brand new. I'm going to get a new certification, a new standard, et cetera. So, kind of when you think about the program at a very simple level, it's really those three items: maintain, improve, and gain new. So, if we go back to the next slide, that whole improve section is really that extend, because with the extend piece, where possible, we're going to extend existing controls to meet the new demands. So we've talked about that already before. So that's really the extend piece. And then the standardize is probably, honestly, the hardest thing for a lot of companies to do. And that's because a lot of companies, unlike ours, is siloed. They have a U.S. operations, and they have a Europe operation, they have an Australia operations, and they have a country manager, and they have different policies and procedures in those. We chose early on to run everything out of our French office. And so we make the decisions based upon, kind of our French headquarters, and everyone in the entire company follows suit. And that's great because, we're follow the sun too. And so what this means is I was able to thankfully have a single process for one thing. And so I have this term that I use, which is called GDPR everywhere. That's sort of what started all this. So in the early days of GDPR, GDPR is still only applicable to the European Union, and at that time it was the United Kingdom as well. And I said, listen, we're going to run this out, but roll this out to Europe. But I remembered a lesson I learned from a previous job. A previous job was on pager call, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd wake up and I'd be sleepy, and first thing I had to do was consult a wiki to figure out exactly what was different about customer A or environment B, and that I just was so inefficient to do. And so I wanted one way of doing things. I don't want one-offs. I don't want snowflakes. I want one way of doing things. And that's going to make it easier to train. It's going to make less mistakes. Everyone's going to know that there's one process. So with GDPR, I said, we're going to give GDPR protections worldwide. We're going to do GDPR deletions worldwide. And boy, let me tell you, I was a hit with our marketing team. They did not like me. What do you mean? I can't, I have to ask permission to use somebody's data in the United States because, United States here, we're pretty free and loose still because we don't have a national privacy law. So anything that's on a business card is public domain, but not in Europe. So by extending those protections, it actually did a couple interesting things. So we standardized. So it's a very big problematic culture change, which you would expect in any organization. So, we were no different. Um, but it did a couple different positive things for us. So now we were standardized. Now we had a single way of doing everything. And then crucially, we could communicate that to customers that we chose the strongest law in the land, the strongest secure, in this case, privacy standard, and we implemented that worldwide. Why? Because we care. And that's one of our primary values is we care, right? And again, it's that good custodians of our customer data. So if you were to do that in your organization, yes, you will face potentially some challenges there, but you're going to earn a lot of good customer goodwill, and then it looks great on your trust center too. Why trust you? Customers these days, especially with inflation and after COVID, people are very discerning. The companies are very discerning, whether it's an individual developer or a regular company. Where are they going to spend their money? And they want to spend their money on people that they can trust. Obviously, they want a good price, but they want a good price, they want a good product, but also are they awful companies or can I trust them? There's a huge push, certainly in geographies other than the United States for ESG related stuff. So, what's your sustainability model? Or do you have green? So we have a green page. We have a sustainability program.
Yep,
So
all makes sense. We got a couple questions coming in. One I want to address right away. I think I can address quickly. Manus asked, he said, you map the controls, but the audit's all about the evidence. Can you also map the evidence? And I just want to show them a quick example of this. So yeah, you can. So if you go to the evidence, here's our controls here in full circle. You don't have to use full circle, but here's an example. There's one around identity and access management. We see it maps to 3 frameworks. If you click on that control, you can see that there's multiple pieces of evidence that it can map into as well. And using our policy example, I mean, this is almost across the board. Like SOC 2 requires administrative access controls. NIST requires administrative access controls. PCI requires administrative access controls. Sometimes there's some nuances for scope, but you start by mapping those controls, getting your scope right. And then typically there's a single piece of evidence that will meet the spirit of the requirements across all 3 of those. And that's something we've worked very hard over the last few years with your team, Joey, to try to get one piece of evidence to map back to multiple audits. But yeah, philosophically, you can do that.
it goes
Um,
beyond that too. It also goes through walkthrough.
oh
But the
yeah,
key is you have to have an auditor that you have to basically have co-running audits. So if you do a PCI one at one point and later down the line a disconnected one, a SOC 2, you might be outside the evidence windows. But if you have an auditor that can come to play and do a walkthrough, and we're going to do the walkthrough with SOC 2 and PCI, or it's essentially the same thing, then the walkthrough asks for all the information right there. And so you're only doing it once.
yeah. This is a little bit beyond this conversation, but we work with a lot of customers, and when we walk in, this was not y'all's problem, but we see this all the time. There's several products, and they're doing SOC 2 and PCI and ISO, whatever they're doing, but they're using 6 different auditors. They have 6 different audit periods. The scopes are just nuanced enough. The team has been trained on each product to do it slightly different. And we'll come in and we'll say, okay, wait a second, we got to harmonize all of this. We have to establish a common governance structure. We have to all agree on the control set and the mapping because there's some judgment involved in that. We have to agree on the evidence set. We have to consolidate down to 1 or 2 auditors instead of 6. And then we have to harmonize the audit periods. So they're auditing SOC 2 and PCI and ISO at the same time and doing the walkthroughs at the same time.
And it saves
A
you
lot of
money when you
work.
do that.
Yeah, a
It
huge
it
amount of money, not
oh,
just for
yeah,
audit fees. It'll absolutely save you audit fees. But more importantly to me is like your engineers are sitting in on one walkthrough, not six,
6.
and they can actually, serve their customers, build the product roadmap. We're not burning political capital. Um, One thing you mentioned that I want to hop to, pull on the thread that you were talking about earlier, Joey, was you mentioned like the ability to pull off the global standard was largely cultural, and Platform has a great culture. I'm going to give my outsider's perspective. I went to y'all's conference in Paris, Symphony Con, and like there's fans. I think there was like 2,000 people or something that were there just to hear y'all CTO talk. They were very excited about the product. Platform's very proud to talk about the great product and services, but also the way that they handle security and privacy. You're proud internally. You guys are also tough. Like you'll stand your ground. You'll push back on the auditor. So it's not just like a nice environment. It's a tough but taking things seriously environment. And I
we
think
also we also are tough internally because just today we rejected 3 vendor requests because they didn't map to our privacy and security standards.
there you go. I mean, y'all take it very seriously. So I think some of that was work you've done to help build that culture. Some of it is natural. The company has a good culture. What's your advice? The reason I'm asking this is because a lot of people think the key to this strategy is mapping controls and getting your evidence request list down. That, so we love our crosswalks, we love our Excel spreadsheets with mapping. That's vitally important. But to me, where I see it go wrong is like either you're not attached to the business problems, you can't get the company to adopt stuff because of organizational change. The culture is not ripe for it. They just won't give you the time of day or hear you. You've been able to pull that off. So
There's
what
an answer
advice
for
would
that.
you give to someone if someone doesn't
Yeah.
have that culture? What advice would you give them to kind of start building that culture and build those relationships?
Yeah, and I would expect a lot of people aren't maybe aren't set up that way. And the easiest way to do it is to tell a story. Tell a story to your executives, people that are going to set business priorities, that are controlling the budget. Tell them a story about here's where we are today. This is where I want to go. This is the impact, the positive impact it's going to have on our cost. This is the positive impact it's going to have on staffing. This is going to be the positive impact it will ultimately have on our customers and ultimately drive new business. And when you present it not as like a traditional kind of boring business case, but as a story about this is our journey, this is where we want to go, this is our vision, these are all the positive things that are to come out, and all we have to do is spend this little bit amount of money. You'll get a lot of support for it. You'll get a lot of pushback because people are going to want to interrogate you and figure out exactly what it
Yep.
is. But it's when you're dealing with the C-suite, when you're dealing with the board, there are basically 2 things that they care most about. Um, and this isn't a negative calling it, but they care about profitability for the company. Again, for the having people make jobs, but also to protect their assets. So like when investors invest in your company, they want to know that it's a safe place, that their money's being protected, and their money will eventually grow. It's the whole point. And it's just the nature of business. So if you can frame it in that sense, like this is the positive impact it's going to have to the business, kind of in a holistic view, you're going to be able to make better inroads. Now you don't get distraught if the first time you do this, people say, "Hey, this is a really good idea." You may just need to plant the seeds the first year, and then as internal, you can watch this happen. Internal conversations will happen. You continue to very lightly advocate for your position. And usually, in most of the companies that I've seen that have implemented this, their company will eventually go through a change, a culture change. It may take them 3 or 4 years, but they will eventually get there. But it starts with you.
That's good advice. What about just real quick? The other thing I've noticed that you do well that others sometimes struggle with is managing your partners. Risk 360 being one of them. Like for example, some of the things that we've done, we great communication in the sense that we've connected Slack channels together so we can chat there. We have conversations. Our team goes back and forth. I've also noticed that you're pretty early and often. Like if you see something coming down the pipeline, like a new framework or something, me and you will talk, or you'll talk to somebody on our team and say, "Hey, this is what we're thinking. Does that check out? How would that impact the audit?" So you're very proactive about that. And we also have hard conversations, like things you're not happy about or things that aren't working or, and so on. And you do that pretty proactively. We don't see that. I don't see that often with other security leaders. Like the vendor management piece of it is not a relationship that's managed well. What advice would you give folks for managing partners that aren't internal, like Risk 360, like other partners that you deal with, which you deal with many? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think for most, in most organizations that are large enough, they probably have a procurement group that deals with the contract, et cetera, and then you have the actual day-to-day group that interfaces. So I've worked with a number of different external auditors, and I've been, and even with some of our clients and their auditors, and I've seen auditors bang their fist at the table and yell. And there are other audit groups, just talking about auditors, other audit groups that, because they have to protect their brand image, they will add extra requirements on top of whatever assessment you're going for, because they want to ensure that their brand is held high. And what those cases, what happens in those cases is you don't have a partnership with them. So you don't, partnership is give and take, right? So you want somebody that you can work with, that can understand you, that takes the time to do it. It's not just checkbox, because ultimately, why are we here? Some people might say, well, I'm here just for the certification. Um, in my case, it's not. It's I want the best protection possible. So when we look at vendor management as a whole, we try to find if it's something simple, it's a SaaS tool, whatever, it doesn't matter. Does it fit the needs? Does it pass all the security checks? That's great. But when you're dealing with something that's much more invasive to your company, you really want to have somebody that you can just have a conversation with. So, and that's one of the reasons why, we went with Risk 360, because we could have this open and shared conversation back and forth about this is what's working. And so, as you said, like we'll see something coming in. Have you guys looked at this? Do you know if this is going to impact? Have you done an evaluation on, oh, hey, PCI just released 4.4.0.1. Do you have any ideas on how that might change things? I'm looking at the summary right now. So that
Yep.
it's really again about partnership. I mean, you said it earlier. You've answered the question.
Yep. Awesome. So we're about to run into some QA for everybody. So
Let's
if
do
y'all
it.
have questions, get ready to do that. We're gonna spend a few minutes on QA. So Andy, who is on our team moderating. So there's a QA button down there. If y'all have them, go ahead and start throwing them in there. But the last thing I want to talk through is and I want to give everybody some hard data, some things that they can take back to their teams, because maybe you're in a place where you sense that this is the right thing to do. You need to harmonize these frameworks. You need to become more efficient. But what does it mean, and how can you take that up to leadership? A couple of things I want to throw out, and Joy, please add to any of this. Is I think from a risk management perspective, when you harmonize across a global standard or a higher standard, it's a huge opportunity to implement best practices. Sometimes I see compliance treated as a check the box. I think that's a dangerous road because you can turn security into a check the box. Compliance really can be an assurance mechanism. It can be an enforcing mechanism and give your team visibility on where you're at. So maybe your team's using SOC 2 as just another compliance check the box. I understand why that happens, but I would encourage y'all to consider how to use that as a tool internal to your organization to make decisions. The second thing is just cost reduction. Like I said, we crunched the numbers for you, Joey, just to see like, all right, by product and all the frameworks you guys do, what if you just did those in the silo like we see so many? And it was about over 1,100 controls. And I do have clients that have 1,100 controls, and that means there's 2,000 pieces of audit evidence, and it's literally a year-round audit, and they're so demoralized. And that's not you. You've cut that down to 288. That's a 75% total reduction. I'm not speaking for you because I don't know, but I would imagine you'd have to really scale up your team. You'd have to bother engineering a lot more to manage that. So that's like a real impact.
Multiple teams. We'd have
Yeah.
to add headcounts to multiple teams. Um, while you're on this, there's one thing that we neglected to talk about,
Yeah.
and that is something that I call continuous audit.
Oh, yeah.
So as part of the operationalized piece, or where you're operationalized and you're scheduling things through, one of the nice things to do is if you have a system like Risk 360's controls, the My Controls view, is that as you go through, you can upload evidence directly. You can upload it into a tool. It could be Jira, it could be Full Circle, it could be one of the other half a dozen other tools that are out there that does this. But the idea is that as you walk through this operationalizing piece, as the schedule piece, you're taking that evidence and you're pushing it up. So you have that copy of evidence ready to go, ready to go. The nice thing about the emerging offering here with Full Circle is that when you get to the end of the year, if you've been doing this, you click a button and then you basically just have walkthroughs at the end. Give or take some, the normal back and forth that happens as people are um, reviewing code. So
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
what that does, sorry, is that in the past, what it looked like is if your audit was at the end of the year, you would start off and you really would have this light year, and then you'd have this massive bubble in the fourth quarter, like for us. And so we would be heroes at the fourth quarter, and I didn't want any heroism anymore. I wanted it to be repeatable success. I wanted people to have vacations. And so by being able to do this throughout the year, you're spreading the burden across so there's not this bubble. So it's easier on people and it's easier on yourself. And then again, you have time to fix any problems that might crop up.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it can operate operationalization. That's I'm butchering that word. Operationalize it. There we go. It's huge. Continuous controls monitoring, and then the last thing, just I want to give people words to say to their team is the customer trust element of it. A lot of us don't frame it in the sense of access to new markets, serving new industry verticals like healthcare, getting into another country that has a unique requirement. And I would encourage us to really think about that as we're building it, because I think we naturally fall into risk management. That's fairly intuitive. Cost reduction is not that intuitive, but if you can reduce it a lot, you're talking about impacting the company's bottom line. And then if you can build customer trust and really understand, maybe work with your sales team, which verticals, what new products are you bringing to the market? How can your compliance story support, millions of dollars in revenue often? And those are really important outcomes for your business. Um, let's do some questions. Andy, do you see anybody out there in questions, or do you have any for us?
Yes, absolutely. Got a couple of here for you. I think this first one here is for Joey. The question is your cores approach something you came up with?
Totally. You won't find it in any book. It came out of me doing this at a couple different places. Most of it was sort of solidified here at Platform, working on it to figure out what. And there's a saying, we're going to try one thing. If it doesn't work, we're going to try something else. And so that's what we did. We kept probing around trying to find the most efficient way of getting it done with the least amount of friction internally. And so that's really kind of the key piece. So if you want to use it, if you're taking a screenshot of the slide, just take the extend piece and add, when possible, extend existing controls to meet new demands. That would be the only thing off of this that you could do. If you want to write a book, let me know. I'll write you the intro.
That's
Good
great,
stuff. Yeah,
Joey.
I'll
Thank you
keep that
so
up.
much.
Yep.
All right, one more that we've got here. This one I think is for you, Joey, as well. You mentioned getting buy-in from the company for the improved standardization. How hard was it to do that, and what did you do to get it?
Partially covered this already, but it depends on what it was. So if a customer was asking for it, then the discussion had to be, here's where our product and engineering and other business goals are, and this is something brand new. And so, do we have the leeway to go fund it? Can we get some partial funding from various different sources? I mentioned customers before, but depending on where you're located geographically, there are some countries like France that you can get some extra money to help, for initiatives if you fall into the right kind of buckets. So there's a couple different external funding sources that could potentially help you with this. So the first part was, is it a customer? Now, if a customer is going to ultimately pay me $20,000 and they're going to require ISO 27001, I'm going to respectfully say I can't do it. I don't. It's on the roadmap. It's not ready yet. We want to get there, as an example. But if someone comes in and said, "Listen, we want to give you, 500 or $1 million, and we want you to be ISO 27001," I have a much better business case to be able to get the entire company to rally around the cause for that. And by the way, as soon as you start talking about dollar signs from customers, it brings in, when I say the company, it brings in the C-suite. And then invariably what happens is that material gets communicated up to the board. And so becomes a generated board interest back and forth. Hey, where are we with this deal? Joey said we got this maybe $1,000, $1 million in revenue. How are we progressing on that? So it can actually snowball, take on a life of its own, and before you're ready for it, it's there, and you have to go do it. So it's both a positive. It's a good problem to have. Is basically what I'm saying.
Hey, Joey, one piece of advice I got from Ryan on our team, who's our chief revenue officer, is he says you get routed to the people you sound like. So if you want to talk to CEOs, then you ask CEO level questions, which you do a good job. CEO level
Yeah.
questions are about risk management. They're about supporting your customers, supporting
Mhm.
business objectives, dollars and cents, like business case. And if you feel like you're a marginalized GRC professional or a CISO that doesn't have access to the CEO or whatever your situation, if you start asking those really hard business centric questions, like what's our product roadmap? Which industry verticals do we need to serve? Are customers willing to help us fund our compliance journey? What are they requiring? How many deals are in the pipeline that require this?
What are
Well,
the
all of a sudden,
timelines?
yeah,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you start getting routed right up to the people who really have that information, and it puts you in a position of power to make a lot better business decisions.
That is hugely important. I can't echo that enough for everyone on the call. That advice is hugely important. I worked prior to my current engagement. I worked for a company and as a consultant, and their GRC group was the place where people that were ready to retire in 5 years went to die in the company. They just went there and they retired there. Their whole culture was fear. And that's not what you want, right? As a security practitioner, as a privacy practitioner, legal doesn't matter. It's never about fear. Yes, there are bad consequences that can happen if you don't do this. But the way to make the change is to tie it towards better outcomes, better customer outcomes, better company outcomes, better financial outcomes, as opposed to fear. Fear,
Excellent.
fear, people just say, talk to the hand.
For sure. I do want to share some free resources and some downloads for you all. But before we do that, Andy, any other questions that are popping up?
Yes, we've got two more here.
Let's do it.
First one is related to Full Circle. What kinds of frameworks can the tool harmonize, and how do I know which to harmonize first?
Ooh. Well, the bottom line is there's alphabet soup of different frameworks. So if there's a acronym and it's popular, Full Circle probably supports that for the most part. And then if there is an obscure framework that happens to not already be in there, you can build custom frameworks and upload them, or either even work with Risk 360 to get them uploaded. So abundance of frameworks. That's not a problem. The second part of your question is a good question. Where do you start? There's a couple approaches. I think it's kind of dependent on your business. So what I've seen is some businesses are just like they're all in on a framework. Like everyone speaks the language. So for example, maybe the whole business speaks the language of ISO 27001. Well, that's probably going to be your baseline and you map things against that. Or if SOC 2 is your baseline, you map against that. So that's one strategy. The other thing to consider is we do have some very large enterprise clients. I think Amazon actually does this. You can look at their compliance reports as they come up with their own custom consolidated framework where they've come up with unique controls and then mapped things on the back half of that. So if you were to look at, say, Amazon's compliance report or Microsoft's compliance report, it's no one's framework. It's not ISO. It's not SOC 2. It's one that they've invented. The words will look very familiar, and they've mapped everything off the back half of that. They've used kind of a single framework strategy. So I think those are two common approaches that we see clients take. Either take the framework everyone's already most familiar with and start there, or create your own. And those are two good paths.
Follow-on question for that, and that is, Christian, what's the easiest frame? I don't have anything. What's the easiest framework to start with if I'm thinking about one?
All right. If I'm going, so what I would do is I would not go easy. I would go like, what does your business need? So if I'm a business, either you're trying to, the reason you're probably getting certified for the first time is you're probably trying to articulate that to a customer. And if you're in the US, that's probably going to be SOC 2. SOC 2 is very flexible. You can adopt your own custom controls that can be bespoke to your organization. Fairly, I won't say low bar, but probably an achievable bar for most organizations to adopt SOC 2. If you're international or you're say Europe based, you probably will end up going ISO 27001 as a baseline because that's industry recognized. So those are probably like for most organizations, unless you have some other nuance, the place that you're going to start.
matters too. So if the smaller you are, sometimes it's actually easier to get a framework started and implemented, depending on the type of security controls. But
Yep. Andy, you said you had a second question. Let's knock that one out.
Yes, actually, I think you've already answered because the primary focus of that question is where to begin. Maybe I'll just ask the last part, which is there anything to avoid when going through harmonization?
Um, Things
doing
to
something
avoid.
that you don't need.
That's exactly where I was about to go. I think I
There's
think there might be a tendency sometimes to be idealistic and try to adopt the world or even be too ambitious and or too granular and then you find yourself in trouble where you have 10,000 things to map and it's just unwieldy and it doesn't make any sense. So I would avoid that and just really stick to what the business needs. Like stick to what the business needs. That's the bottom line, I think.
anything that's going to potentially damage your business, hinder the business, outside of just basic security, basic privacy, that's going to be kind of the big thing to avoid, right? There is the what we must have, and then there's the nice to haves, and it's very certainly okay, and I encourage it for you to build a plan and socialize a plan. In the next 5 years, we want to be, we're here, we've got SOC 2. In the next 5 years, we want to have ISO 27001. It's SMART goals, right? You want to make
Yep.
it achievable for that. But you can't go any faster than the business can tolerate, because if you put too much burden on the business, it's like a person that's working minimum wage. They have too much insurance burden, so they don't carry insurance. We don't want that for the company, right? We want the company to have this nice balancing act, and then again, as we've mentioned, bring, kind of draw that into what the customer requirements. If you're not getting any customer requirements for that, then that should give you a little maneuvering room, but it also allows you to build a plan and say, we don't have any customer requirements for this yet, but we know in order to break into this new market, so remember those questions that Christian was asking earlier, we're going to break into this new market. What's required for that market? Let's go look at that one, and let's start working our way there. And you might just start with a gap analysis to figure out where you might have some gaps, and then start to gently start addressing those, over the course of a business year. And then as your sales team gets a little bit more solidified around a target, you'd be pretty sure that they're going to start communicating, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? Another thing that's useful for all of you that have access to sales and marketing data is to, especially if use a tool like Salesforce, is to keep a log. You can do it as a spreadsheet, but you can also do it as an automated report in something like Salesforce, whatever your CRM is, of all of the customers, all of the potential opportunities that you have won and lost, specifically the lost ones, and what the required compliance item is there. Do they need GDPR? Do they need ISO 27001? And what you can do is run periodic reports and say, at the end of this, for the last business year, we could have made $365,000 if we had ISO 27001. And that's just the people that your sales team has talked to, not the people that are hidden behind the scenes that don't come to you, because the first thing to look for is, do you have ISO 27001? So
Yep.
gathering that sales information will help you plan a strategy of how to get from where you're at and helping
Yeah.
the sales team.
That's next level, but that's really good business planning. I know we're right at time here. So what I want to do is just let people know that we have two free resources that I think make sense if this whole topic was compelling to you. One is we have a client called CSG. You might know Citrix. They're a member of Cloud Services Group, Cloud Software Group. Now we did this harmonized security and compliance strategy with them, reduced their controls by about 50%. And ultimately saved them almost $2 million in their compliance efforts. We did a webinar with their team just like this one where we talked through the whole strategy and what was done. So if that resonates with you and you need some more talking points or more examples to point back to, we'll link to that video and the use case in this video if you're watching this. And then if you want kind of all of this in a white paper in a written format so you can play it back to your team or hand it off, we have a white paper called Single Framework Strategy, and we'll put the link to download that as well. So Joey, thank you so much for being here, man. This is great. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and we appreciate it.
And hopefully everybody got got something out of this. There's been lots of resources, lots of things here to do. So feel free to play with it, experiment it. Don't feel that you're locked into a specific way. Take what you've learned. Hopefully you've learned something. Take what you've learned, figure out how to make that work in your environment, and profit.
Awesome. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Joey.